It's been quite a morning. I appreciate you coming. We're nicknaming this summit Between Traffic and Technology. But you're actually here to talk about the state and the art of best practices and keeping people safe in domestic violence as the dynamic technology world continues to change. I'd like to take a little bit of time to introduce Carl Breyer, the Vice President of Good Shepherd Shelters Board, and he'll kick us off this morning. Carl?
Thank you, everybody. I hope everybody had a good dose of coffee. And sorry about the technology. I think technology can be overrated anyway. So it's really the content that's important, not how we discuss it. So welcome to the second annual Summit on Domestic Violence. We're very happy to be co-hosting this event with the USC School of Social Work. And we hope this will be a further extension of our relationship for many years to come. So I was at our inaugural event last year on campus, and I was very impressed, especially for a first-time event. We began planning this summit, I should say that the staff at the shelter began planning the summit earlier this year when there was that Supreme Court ruling was still pending and on trial, Alonis versus the United States. And that was definitely top of mind, and hence the theme for this year's summit, which is practice and safety in the age of technology. You will be hearing from survivors, practitioners, lawyers, policymakers, product and service providers this morning as we begin to explore this vast topic. For those of you who are just learning about the Good Shepherd Shelter, let me give you a few highlights. It's the first domestic shelter in the city of Los Angeles, excuse me, and has pioneered recognition and recovery of domestic violence victims in LA for 40 years. We are working to end the generational cycle of violence, and we succeed with 90% of our families going on to lead violence-free lives. And that's kind of what really drew me in to be involved at a board level was the success rate. The rate of recidivism, I think that's a pretty big word for me, is very low. And so, when it comes to allocating everybody's precious time and resources, we want to go with the people who can get the job done. And I was particularly moved by the examples of the sisters of the Good Shepherd who live it 24 hours a day. They don't go home at night and put that job on the shelf. They live at the shelter, and they dedicate their entire lives to serving this constituency. So we're very glad that Dean Flynn is here today with us. As many of you know, Dean Flynn is a transformational leader whose career has spanned appointments in higher education, consulting on strategic planning for county governments and nonprofit organizations, practice in mental health and school social work, and membership on numerous boards at the local, national, and international levels. She was appointed Dean of Social Work at USC in 1997, only the second woman to hold this position in the school's nearly 100-year history. During her tenure, she's expanded the school's faculty from 23 to 100 full-time faculty, and who now offer graduate instruction on campus and across the nation in 38 states. That's something I had no clue was going on. And just kind of old school, go to campus, SC, and fight on. But not much to say. Not a lot of cheering right now on the gridiron, but that's okay. We'll get through that. At the Good Shepherd Shelter, we're proud to partner with the School of Social Work not only on this event, but with interns from the MSW program serving our program. Dean Flynn, before you come up to share your thoughts with us this morning, could you join me here? We have a small token of our appreciation for your support.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Because of my work with boards, I know how important volunteer leadership is and how difficult it is for people to find time to contribute their leadership. So I know how grateful Good Shepherd must be to you for your time and your leadership. So you probably thought I was Mayor Garcetti because he was supposed to be here, and I want to say I'm not, for anybody who's even marginally confused about this. And I was also not fully expecting to give his address, and so I'm not doing that either. I'm actually not even going to talk about the topic of the conference. I am going to allude to technology, but I want to tell you a short story about something that just happened to me. I do some work as part of the American Academy of Social Work in Washington. And we just had a meeting recently of a subcommittee of that group to which I belong. And the subject of domestic violence came up. And these, the members of the American Academy are the most distinguished scholars in social work. They do the best science that we do. And some of them are specialists in domestic violence. So they started talking about what I should say, because I mentioned I was going to see all of you. And one of them said, well, you know, nothing has changed in that field since the 1970s. I thought, I wonder if that's true. And a second one said, well, be sure when you see them to remind them that the American Academy of Social Work is launching 12 grand challenges for our field and for this society. It's something like the American Academy of Engineering has done, the Gates Foundation has done, the Government of Canada has done. It's identifying a set of grand problems that we think we can make significant progress in addressing over the next decade. And family violence is one of the 12 grand challenges that the field has selected. So there will be new opportunities for all of us broadly in this community to engage in a partnership between the community and scientific activity to advance our understanding of domestic violence and find more effective ways to address it. So after they told me to tell you this, they went back to the theme that the reason that nothing has probably changed. Now, I'm not agreeing with this. I'm just continuing the coaching that they gave me for this. They said the main reason that there has been so little progress is that the field has been connected too strongly to criminal justice, and that it ought to be redefined at the current time, not only to include criminal justice, but to include public health and social work and some other disciplines which really have not played a central part in the movement up till now. So I was so challenged by the question of whether this was true, whether nothing has changed, whether we don't know much more than we did when the movement started, and what it is we need to be doing, if any of that is true, that's what my talk is about. So I'm going to use the word technology, and I'll stick it in there every time I happen to think about it, so that you feel that I'm on track even a little bit. But actually, I hope you don't mind my ownership of the topic, but it really seems fundamental to me. So, how are we doing? What happened to this? It's gone. Technology is not working. Oh well, I'll just get started and keep going, and then if something happens, I can take advantage of it. So, in a very brief word about how we all got here, you know, the first legal protections for anybody, any women in particular, against domestic violence were established in this country in 1871. That's about the same time that we also became sensitive to child abuse, and the first case of public intervention in a child abuse case was recognized and socially sanctioned. So protections have been extended since that time, but actually it's not been until about 2000 that protection orders were enforced in all states in the country. So while protection orders could be issued, 50% of the states did not have police enforcement of them. And there has been considerable momentum in some of the legislation that provides the umbrella for this field, especially in 2013 when LGBT and American Indian women were included in the new legislation. I found out that California's been an exemplar. We are the first state to introduce programs to protect women, especially shelters. The shelter movement, most of the leadership for it originated here in the 1970s. I looked across, there is a website that provides to varying degrees a summary of all the shelter programs across the United States and the services that they provide. Actually, we are a leader in that respect. We have 270 programs across 81 cities in California. We have the most significant, therefore, built out here, even compared, I looked at New York, I looked at Chicago, you know, other major cities. We have the most impressive build out of programs of any other state. And so I think by those measures, that is to say we were the first and to say that we have the most extensive build out, we should pause and say congratulations to all of you who've contributed that and who have made that possible. This is something of which everyone should be proud. But the question is, of course, where we are today, because in my experience, people let you be proud for about 20 seconds, and then they say, well, what is the next thing you failed to do? So that's the subject of my talk. Not so much what you failed to do, but what lies ahead. So over the past 2 decades, at least, given the fact we have very unreliable statistics, I mean, this underlies everything that we have to talk about in domestic violence, but generally, most of the statistics seem to indicate that there's been a general decline overall in the past 2 decades. However, there is a rise among certain subpopulations, especially adolescents. So dating violence, teen violence is more prevalent now than it has been in the past. And there appears to be an increasing rate among gay men. So I'm using these, there are other subpopulations, but I guess what I'm pointing out here is that we now have to pay closer attention to groups that have very differing needs and the origin of the challenge to them and the problems for them are less generalizable. However, it does seem, even when you look at all the conflicting data, at least 24% of individuals have been assaulted, at one time in their lives. That's men or women. And that both men and women are perpetrators. So that women as perpetrators are now a group which some people are studying, and the situations under which they become perpetrators and the situations under which they are more violent than men are not well understood, but are beginning to be identified. So, who's at risk? What kinds of groups are most likely to be exposed? Younger people. In general, those who are exposed to domestic violence, either as perpetrators or as victims, are younger, not just adolescents, but 20s, early 30s. A new factor has been identified, which is very interesting, that seems to be strongly associated across all types of violence. And that is that these generally are people that have insecure employment and insecure housing. And these are two variables that have, of course, are understood to be associated with other forms of crime and social instability. So it's not surprising to see this, but this is an important fact simply because these are two variables that we don't particularly think of when we think of intervening, or some of us do, but they haven't, for others, these don't figure as prominently. Another somewhat consistent characteristic of people involved in domestic violence is their own parenting. And by their own parenting or parenting style, I don't mean what they do to their children, it's how they were treated as children. And it seems to be not so much whether they were abused, but the parenting style itself. And where parents had a style of being contemptuous when they were punishing a child, of being shaming, using shaming to an extreme degree. Kids seem to experience a kind of persistent trauma that led itself to aggression and violence as adults. Obviously, negative peer involvement it seems an almost universal factor in any kind of deviant behavior. And these factors are the same for men as for women, as far as we can see. Well, it's obvious that domestic violence is not good for you. There are health effects and employment effects. One of the most recently studied health effects is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, both among children in homes where there is violence and among victims and perpetrators. 45% of perpetrators have been diagnosed with PTSD. A corollary of this, but something that is only just Sojourner, the Sojourner program in Phoenix, Arizona, and a few others, are just starting to look at traumatic brain injury as associated with domestic violence, and actually to add forensic nursing to their program, just because the prevalence of traumatic brain injury seems to be much greater than people have suspected, and it's generally not been treated. It's not been diagnosed or recognized. And of course, TBI manifests itself in, as does PTSD, in insomnia and a whole series of other symptoms that we sometimes treat, but we don't get the underlying disorder. These kinds of disorders, these adverse psychological outcomes seem to be much more pronounced and much more persistent in women as opposed to men. I want to comment also on the effects on children. Some of you in our school, we have a lot of interest in military social work. We work both with veterans, especially from Afghanistan and Iraq, but also with their families. And one of the things that we become especially sensitive to is secondary trauma. It's not secondary to the people who experience it, but by secondary trauma, we mean the fact that you've been exposed to certain violence creates changes in you, but your family also experiences these changes, and sometimes their outcomes are worse than yours. And this seems to be true of children. This is a very complex area, and I'm not going to talk about it very much because there's so many factors that influence how children respond. And the main thing that I want to emphasize is that children are as much victims of trauma as are the adults. And the treatment or the concept of intervention has to include children where they are present in the family, whether they themselves have been abused or not. And depending on their gender and depending on their age and so on, they react to this exposure in ways that involve aggression to others, in some cases, in depression, a whole series of factors, including poor progress in school and other factors. So I did spend some time arguing with my friends and colleagues in Washington about what we really understand today and what does account for why partners become involved in violent situations with each other. And of course, since I'm with a group of scholars, nobody agrees on anything, right? So, but actually I found, as I went back into the literature is full of conflict. We actually don't have much consensus on what causes, whether violence is socially caused or psychologically caused, economically caused. And the problem with not having any real agreement on why we have violence is then we don't know what kinds of policies to promote. We don't know whether we should promote housing policies, criminal justice policies, public health policies. Very hard to get good thinking about what should be next. The one area that does seem to be significantly better is lethality assessment. And there are several measures now that can be used to assess whether people are likely to be lethal. But below that, we still don't have good assessment measures about whether someone is likely to be violent, whether they are likely to continue to be violent, and therefore we don't know how to intervene. We have a very low evidence base for the field. And I'm not sure people have tried to account for this in different ways, but most of them state that the fact that the shelter movement has been so connected to the Department of Justice and the relatively low funding for research outside of matters that interest justice have made funding really unavailable to explore other causative factors, forms of assessment, and forms of collaboration. So this remains a real sticking point. However, there are still 4 theories out there, and there are probably better ones that we have yet to evolve. But initially, as we all know, the shelter movement in particular developed out of the feminist movement in the 1970s, and it was predicated on the notion that there was socially sanctioned male violence, Male domination was protected in society, and there certainly, if you go back to legal history, that statement is true. But and this is what gave power to the shelter movement. That is, that this was a violation of human rights, and it was something that should be stopped. So it caught people's attention. It was a very powerful way to start. But subsequently, as we've looked at the research, when we talk to men who are perpetrators, when we interview them, when we interview women in violent relationships, when we look at so-called bidirectional violence, where both partners are violent, and we try to ask people about their motives or what drove them, we don't find, at least psychologists and others who've been studying this, we don't find that gender dominance is a theme that most people bring up. There's actually pretty weak association from a research point of view to uphold this as the cause for the domestic violence that we see today. In fact, most men in North America today don't actually believe that women should be dominated and don't agree with violence as a solution. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't become involved in this, but we're mainly talking about what's socially sanctioned, what is a prevalent view. Always there are exceptions. Second, the idea of intergenerational transfer, that is, that people who have been in abusive situations then themselves become abusive, on a common sense basis, it seems to be very significant, it seems to hold water. But when we actually look at situations, we interview families, we interview children, we take intergenerational observations, what we find is that there are so many other factors that intervene that simply the presence of violence in a home does not predict that children themselves will become aggressors when they grow up. There are a number of other factors. So while this is something you would take into consideration, it's not powerful enough to explain what we see. There are a number of psychological and neurologically determined variables that seem to be extremely important. And these are associated with people are beginning to study from a biological point of view, from a physiological point of view, whether there are certain factors in brain structure and brain functioning that make people less able to regulate their behavior. We're seeing this in studies of autism, we're seeing this in studies of other conditions, and people prone to domestic violence, especially severe domestic violence, seem to have some neurological disorders, or that is what some of the early research is suggesting. So it means that we need to have perhaps another lens on our understanding of what is driving violence in certain individuals. And we've come to understand also that economic insecurity and housing insecurity are, as I've pointed out before, associated with violence, and when these sources of insecurity are removed, some families stop becoming violent. So we don't understand, again, how all of these relationships are connected, but it is another theory that poverty, and it's not necessarily poverty, it's the insecurity, the unemployment, the absence of a stable place to live, feed into the process of violence in ways that, in a more powerful way than we had understood before. So I haven't gotten to technology yet. I'm sure there's some technology in here. It's coming. So where do we go where do we go from here? And I know that one of the things that's inspired Good Shepherd to have you all here is that very question, which is how to expand the vision that all of you have of how we get a hold of this problem in society and how we become more effective. Carl was talking about the success rate of the shelter, and that's something to be very excited and very positive about. So this is not to say that there is a failure to succeed with certain groups of people, but as we know, there is a very large pool of people who have not been addressed and for whom we do not have resources. And we also know that we're focused pretty much by the time somebody's in a shelter with a situation of complete breakdown. So the issue is, how might we think a little more broadly about getting there earlier perhaps, or intervening in different ways? So that's the question I want to raise, and not to dismiss the accomplishments in any way that have been achieved. So there seem to be three things that are most needed in the field. One is a broader range of interventions, and by a broader range of interventions, what I mean is that as far as we know, there is no single specific clinical intervention that has the greatest success in reducing partner violence. There's no single magic bullet, silver bullet. In fact, what the literature seems to show is there's actually a whole array of interventions, of therapeutic, of treatment approaches, and all of them are okay with some groups, to some degree. But what we need is a lot more refinement in understanding selectively which kinds of interventions, what kind of treatment strategies that we use, and understanding better the differences in the populations that we're addressing. So there is profound disappointment, if from the scholarly side, with what we have been able to imagine with the research that's available on treatment approaches. And so the best we have for domestic violence at this point is what we have for any population. We have, of course, cognitive behavioral therapies, and we have a whole series of other kinds of interventions that address attachment and so on. But none of it is a silver bullet, and we need much better, much broader range of interventions. We need wider collaborations, I'll talk about that in a minute, and better evidence-based practice. So, children's services. We've just talked about secondary trauma and the connection to not just to child protective services, but to family programs, to multi-service agencies, so that we can begin identifying and connecting with the populations of children that they serve. These are victims too, whether they are in the shelter or whether they are still in the school. And I don't see, at least in Los Angeles, and maybe it's there, I don't see this bridge between the child protective services community and the shelters in the way that it could be developed. And I don't think that's because people don't want to. It's just a place, an area for further development. We need better connections to schools, and I'll come back to this, but there is funding, state funding now in the schools for foster kids, for kids who have special disadvantages as they enter the schools. and for the shelters to identify and connect to these new funding sources, this new funding source, seems to me would be a very important advantage in terms of extending prevention. And I'll mention this in a second. You could do that online. There's the technology part. Nursing and medicine. There is a tendency, I noticed, in a few shelters across the country to add forensic nursing, and where forensic nursing has not been added, to consider connections to nurse practitioners and school nurses and to the medical community more broadly. And that's for the new neurological kinds of assessment as well as treatment of injuries. I mean, we've seen the medicine in terms of treatment when somebody's been physically injured. Now I'm talking more about assessment and early appraisal and involving the medical community in that. Family housing programs. There's a tremendous struggle in Los Angeles for resources for family housing. Adults, if you do a cost-benefit analysis, and that's the only basis you do it, the economics of it will show you every time that adult housing is better than family housing, because adults are addicted, adults are on the street, adults commit crimes. You take them off the street, you have immediate savings to the community. It's harder to show that for family housing. The data's not there. And yet that might be one of the most useful things that those in the shelter movement and broadly in the domestic violence movement could become interested in, attached to, support, and work on. It's obviously directly connected to things that are important for you. Business and industry. At SC, of course, we're a private school. We're interested in how the private sector achieves public purposes, public good. And I think the business community has become much more socially responsible than, and much more sophisticated about how that happens than at any time that I'm previously aware. So there are new avenues for connecting to business beyond saying, would you please give us a donation? There are new ways of partnering with the business community, with real estate developers who are interested in expanding different types of housing. There are a number of real estate developers that are interested in this area. Expanding opportunities for projects involving corporate social responsibility, which most large companies and businesses are interested in as members of this community. So there's a lot of room for creative thinking about new avenues to partner with business and industry that advance this agenda, and it's important to business because people don't come to work when they've been beaten up. When people are not feeling well, when people are in distressing and violent situations, they are not productive workers. And it pays, it literally pays for business to be interested in this problem. The military. We have more veterans in Orange County and Los Angeles as a percentage of the population than any other place in the country. And we have more reservists and other military people who are living in the community and who are not recognized as having military-related problems. The reservists, our National Guard, are particularly, those families have been, many of them have been deployed, exposed to violence, and simply, they have no base to come back to. They simply come back and they are dumped in the community. And their kids have been traumatized, not just by deployment, But anybody who's not living on a base doesn't get the public support, doesn't get the public understanding, doesn't come back to a group that knows what's happened. So all those families are at double jeopardy for domestic violence, for divorce, for other kinds of upset, especially those with less than honorable discharge, and society completely rejects them. So this is a group that we have generally ignored, where outreach is really important, and where the military is very responsive, at least in my experience. And finally, substance abuse programs. There's a high association. Sometimes people think as much as 50% of domestic violence is impacted by substance abuse. And I think last year we talked about the essential need for understanding more about substance abuse, but also working more closely with those programs. The problem is the research now shows that it isn't just because somebody is abusing drugs or abusing alcohol that they will become violent. What we now know, unfortunately, is that it's much more complicated, that it's an intervening, disinhibiting factor. But not everybody who is alcohol dependent or drug dependent is violent. So what is it that creates this in some people and not others? And again, we come back to neurological factors, parenting, other kinds of predisposition, and the need for better assessment tools. So, I'm going to skip ahead here because we've got kind of a late start. What is it we need at this point? And I'm going to speak a little about evidence-based practice. Yeah, I've already commented on how difficult it is to establish innovations. But I do want to tell you about something that's really interesting that has just started, again in Los Angeles County, it's just started up. In the mental health area, there's something called a practice network, and it consists of about 40 professionals in mental health in different agencies who, as a combined group, there are about 40 of them, they're all practitioners, they combined serve about 300,000 patients every year in their respective practice, their agencies. So these 40 people actually have a very large exposure to human problems and to what works, and to ideas about how to improve practice, how to do research on practice. And they do little mini studies all the time where they report back to each other in a month. This is not a big funded clinical study. This is something where you're using the experience of practitioners, of people on the ground who are being more reflective and documenting things. But for example, one of the doctors in this network, he just has a little card in his pocket, and when the patient comes in, he pulls the card out of his pocket and they click off 3 places on the card and he puts it back in his pocket. That's his data collection. So it's very quick, it's very informal, it's very on the ground. And this idea of practice networks fits so beautifully into what you do. I mean, you're already a network. And if you connected with some of these other practice networks as a way of building and sharing practice, kind of on the spot, and also assessing what you do on the spot, that would be something new. That would not cost a fortune. It would cost some time. But they don't spend that much time on the phone. They connect with each other every month. So practice networks are a really interesting idea that you might want to consider. And that's on the telephone, so that's a form of technology. And finally, you know, we need to change universities. Some people think every university ought to have a required course in domestic violence because it's so fundamental to family functioning. But doing what Good Shepherd is doing, which is building stronger connections with the universities, looking at the curriculum that's being offered, making more connections between research and what you do through university training. And again, by the way, some online programs might not be a bad idea, might help to advance practice. So to sum up, well, we do need to know more. We always need to know more. This is not the exact version of my talk. It's version 2 and not 3. So what I really wanted to say there is that we want to expand, I would say, the social and health emphasis in the shelter movement, and to bring it beyond, not to abandon the connections, the necessary connections to criminal justice system, but to expand the base and the concept of what the base is in order to take advantage of knowledge and perspectives that are greatly needed. We need more systematic study of shelter outcomes. If Good Shepherd is successful, why is that? That's really important to understand. What we've been discussing is, well, we may know or we may not know. And if there is a high level of success, then that we have to organize it and think about it in a way that it can be extended to others. And as I've been trying to argue, we need to engage new resources. So I want to thank you for your time and letting me opine about your field in which and I want to congratulate all of you on the persistence and the passion and the deep concern that you bring to this work. So important. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to bring up Barry Goldajarb, our Manager of Education, Outreach, and Advocacy for Good Shepherd Shelter, and begin our first panel, The Faces of Domestic Violence. It'll take 1 minute. Please don't leave the room. One of our panelists will be off stage and participating for safety purposes. So thank you so much.
So often with domestic violence, we think of the physical abuse that victims endure. But today, in the spirit of technology, we're going to be talking to some victims of cyber stalking. And so often with technology in our own lives, it's become kind of an asset, a way for us to connect, a really positive thing in our lives. But with domestic violence and domestic abuse, it's really about control. And with Facebook and social media and our cell phones, we can be tracked wherever we are. And it has become a really terrible mechanism for perpetuating domestic abuse. Along those lines also, so you'll be hearing from a couple of victims who have experienced cyber stalking. In addition to someone here, Mr. McNamara, Michael, he has been able to use social media and technology to help rescue victims of domestic violence. So I want to start out by introducing Samantha. And again, she's going to be sitting behind there and she's going to be telling her story.
Thank you for this opportunity to come and share my story with you. I am a survivor and a victim of stalking, both on the internet as well as in person. My experience with stalking began in the midst of a violent relationship. The stalking started a few months prior to it getting any physical, but the first example of how I was stalked was I was living with my boyfriend at the time along with his kids, and we had a shared family program on our cell phones. And I started noticing that my cell phone was acting up. One thing led to another. I ended up finding out that he had installed a program to track me on my cell phone. And what was eating my battery up, what was causing my cell phone to start acting up was, in fact, I was getting tracked about 50 times a day. Now at that time, I was going to work, I was going to school, and then I was coming home late at night. But still, I was being tracked all the time. By the time I figured this out, it started concerning me because there was nowhere that I was actually going. But every few minutes, he was trying to find out where I was. Then he started doing things like showing up at my work, showing up at my school. If I would go out with friends, he would just show up. He would start going to other friends' houses trying to locate me if I had shut my cell phone off, thinking I was somewhere that I wasn't supposed to be. When that wasn't good enough for him, he started figuring out my passwords and hacking into my emails. He would start reading my emails. He would then send out emails to guy friends alleging that we were cheating. He figured out how to hack into my Facebook account and started making posts that, of course, weren't from me and were not very nice. This kind of activity started getting worse and worse, and eventually it got to a point where I fled the apartment that we lived at, and I went to a family member's house. And at that point, our relationship was over, but the stalking continued. From the time that I left, for the next 6 months, I was receiving between 400 and 500 emails a month. I was receiving unbelievable text messages. He even started creating Facebook accounts that alleged to be mine, but by that time I had already taken down my Facebook. I had no social media, but he would go through and start creating profiles, seeming to be me and trying to contact my friends, my family member. He was trying to get information from them as to where I was. The emails were continuing. He even went so far, in order to tick me off, to create profiles on sex websites, giving away personal information about me. And every time I would come across one, I would end up contacting the company, making them remove it. He would figure it out, and he would create another one in its stead. This continued despite obtaining a restraining order. He was still continuing to do this. Eventually, my local police department got involved regarding this, and even though there were detectives on the case, criminal charges had been filed, the stalking still continued. I was still receiving a ton of emails. I was still having problems with him creating social media accounts, contacting friends and family. He was still showing up at my work, at my parents' house, at friends' houses, and frankly, the only time that it stopped is when he eventually went into prison. But from even there, it's just, he was still trying to find ways to contact me. Through my experience, I can say that being stalked is extremely scary. You never know where they're going to be. You never know if they're going to show up. When it comes to using cyber stalking, it's horrible because people don't know who it really is. They don't know if it's him or if it's me. And the information that was going out there really caused a lot of concern for my personal safety. Even things now, I can't have any type of social media. I can't have Facebook. I can't connect through those kind of things to my extended family that lives in another country because there's too much concern of him locating me. You can't even do LinkedIn and try and get business networking going because then that does help him locate where you are. There's been a lot of fear and worry that has gone into this. There has been a lot of, based on things that he said, a lot of shame that never should have been there, all because he wanted to control me, because he was angry when I left and just wanted to cause fear. This is the basis of what stalking does, whether it's on the internet or in person. It's all for the same purpose, and that's control. So that's my story on cyber stalking.
And I want to introduce Michael.
Good morning. My name is Mike McNamara. I'm recently retired from the Marine Corps, so some of the things that got said this morning hit very close to home. I have 3 combat tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I have chronic PTSD, and so the issue that you all deal with, I will tell you, is near and dear to my heart, and as I've gotten older, it only gets more near and dear to my heart. 20 years ago last month, I'm born and raised Irish Catholic kid in Sacramento, California. Father was in Major League Baseball, managed the Angels at one point, and so lived a pretty comfortable life. My sister married a guy who was a controlling guy. I told my mom, I said, I know guys like that, and if he ever touches her, you know, I was in the Marine Corps here at Camp Pendleton, or down at Camp Pendleton. I said, I'll come to Sacramento and I will do to him what he's done to her. He beat her up the first time, and my parents are divorced, kind of scorched earth, don't speak. They spoke that day. My mother told my father, you need to talk to Michael because he's gonna do something about this. So my dad called me and we had a very unpleasant conversation. And I didn't go up there. I'd married and had 2 sons at the time and still have them. And one's in Iraq today. Both are Marines. And I have 2 daughters as well. So in September of 1996, I went to work. As I walked in, the secretary said, hey, you need to call your cousin, it's an emergency. So I assumed one of my parents had passed away, and wondered why my cousin would be calling me. You know, my dad lives in Nashville, my mom's lived in Indianapolis at the time, and my cousin lives in Sacramento, where we were born and raised. So I call him, he's like a brother to me. What's going on? He said, hey, I don't know how to say this. And I said, just say it. And he said, this morning, Monroe killed the boys, and he killed himself. And I said, Peggy, my older sister. And he said, she's okay. And I said, what happened? And he said, I don't know. So I called my dad, who was working for the Angels at the time. They were having their instructional league over in Arizona. He was on the field. The guy said, yeah, well, he's on the field. I don't know. I said, just shut up and go get my dad, please. And my dad comes to the phone, and I told him what happened, and he said, I can't believe he did it. And I tell, when I do this, some days it's easier, some days it's harder, depending on where I am in my menstrual cycle. And today, I might have to pause a few times. And I couldn't believe he said that. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, he threatened to do this a month ago. And so there was neither the time nor the place to have that discussion about that, because I never got told. And so what happened that morning was, what happened a month previous was my sister visited with her husband about ending their marriage. And he said, they were sitting on the couch. He got up and he said, hold on a second. He went back into their bedroom. He got his 9mm pistol. He loaded it and he put it on his lap as he sat down on the couch, and he said, if you try to take my sons, I'll kill them, I'll kill myself, and I'll ruin your life forever. And she got very upset. They both started crying. She said, you don't mean that. And he broke down. She took the gun, unloaded it, put it back in the closet. And fast forward to a month later, he stays out all night. She's going to leave in the morning. He comes in. Why aren't you going to work? We're leaving today. He said, really? Walked back into the bedroom, got his pistol. My 4-year-old nephew, Tyler, was watching cartoons. He walked in and he shot him in the head. My 6-year-old nephew, Tori, ran through the house. He had to chase him through the house, caught him, and shot him in the head. He beat my sister, and then he went back in the bedroom and put a pistol in his mouth, put the gun in his mouth, and killed himself. I sat at the funerals. The reason I'm here today, I sat at the funeral. 2 small white caskets of my nephews, and I'd done enough crying, and I thought, for the rest of my life, whenever I have the opportunity to tell their story, I will certainly do that. And at some point, their story is going to save somebody's life. And as my life goes on and I continue to tell their story, it will save more and more lives. And so while we can't reverse what happened to us, they can certainly be a positive factor in helping other people change their lives and not have to endure what my family lives with. And I will tell you that I'm an infantry officer, okay? So for those of you not familiar with the Marine Corps, the military, we locate, close with, and destroy the enemies of the United States of America with rifles most of the time. And we use other stuff on occasion, but that's what we do. All right, it's not too fancy. In all the things I've seen in 3 years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, nothing's close to what my sister went through that day. None of my friends who've had terrible experience, nor myself, have had to sit there with their children and wait for EMTs to come to see if they could help them. Okay, none of my friends live with that. My sister, I will tell you, much to my surprise, is still alive, has not taken her own life, although she feels tremendous guilt about what happened that day. And I'll tell you, just to make a couple points of how important the work you do is, and I think the importance that technology plays for it in it. My sister did not seek out any help to leave, and she lives with that guilt to this day. And there's nothing any of us can say to her about it, right? The only thing we can say is there's no way that anybody could link his conduct that day to make it your fault, Peggy. There's no way. But as a mother, that's not what she feels. Her only 2 children, right? Her house is empty today. She doesn't have boys in college. One of them probably just out of college, going to work. They're not there for Christmas or Thanksgiving. And so the first point I would make to you is, I think it ought to be a point in every high school class, public health, because this is a public health issue in my opinion, and girls ought to walk out of there knowing a website that they can go to in any community that will tell them the basics of what do I do when I can't get away from him, okay? And I will tell you this as a veteran, I started having problems with PTSD. I got back from Afghanistan, my final combat deployment in 2011. I was working for a guy still in the Marine Corps who was the worst officer I've ever worked for in my life. I call it my black blood, was moving around in me too much. It's a blood that you kill with in combat, and I was feeling it. But I knew what to do because I'd been to classes, and the Marine Corps had taught me, hey, when you feel like you're losing it, you can go talk at the VA. There's vet centers. Your health record will stay there. It won't affect, like, if I have a top secret clearance, I can go to work in the defense industry, but not if you have indications of bad mental health. Your record will stay there at that branch and it won't go anywhere else. I knew that. They taught me that. So I knew where to go to find help, and I did find help. And they've taught me how to live with it, right? And the most important thing I learned a long time ago was you're not getting over it. You're going to learn how to live with it, though. And so the second thing, in terms of, I just had an experience within the last month. A friend of mine, my mom passed away a month ago. She Facebook messages me, hey, sorry to hear about your mom. We're professional colleagues. When I'm not in the Marine Corps, I did a radio show. She was in the news business, and I watched her work, respected her. She sends me a message and says, sorry to hear about your mom, blah, blah, blah. Hadn't heard from her in a while. Hey, how are you? I'm okay, just okay. Yeah, you want to talk about it? Not really. So we keep talking, and then she says, if I tell you something, will you promise not to do anything about it or tell anybody about it? And the experience, right, that I've had in my life, and this isn't the first time I've been to an event like this or spoken at one of these, okay? I do it every time that I can because I owe that to my nephew. So I am no stranger to this forum. I'm no stranger to helping people, right? And when she said that, I knew exactly what had happened to her. And to make a long story short, she then told me that she had, been, to the emergency room twice. She had restraining orders, yada, yada, yada. So I said, how does it end, though? And I said, are you ready to leave? And she said, yeah. So over the last 3 weeks, she's left. I helped. And she's now away from him, and nobody knows where she's at. She was isolated because the first time she left, her family gave up her location to him because they like him, they loved him, right? He was able to track her on her phone, right? Look at, messages and all the stuff that you can do in the way you isolate somebody. But thankfully, she knew me, and with my experience, I could help her and say, hey, you're going to leave when he goes to work Monday morning. I'll follow him to work. If he turns around, I'll stop him because I'm a Marine and I can do stuff like that, right? And if he does turn around, it'll be a short conversation and you'll be free of him. You'll shut that cell phone off and you'll disappear. You won't tell your family where you're going, although you'll communicate with them, and you'll be safe. And so the way we communicated was on Snapchat. Right? No record, everything disappears. So in terms of a tool for victims of domestic violence, Snapchat, I would tell you absolutely. No record, no Facebook, no email, none of that. And certainly no text message or anything on your cell phone. Okay, so technology does have a role, and I would tell you 2 roles. One, every girl should leave health class in high school with a website in a little card in her wallet, in her purse that says, you may think this will never happen to you, but if it does, go to this website and it will tell you. And that way you can avoid living with the situation that my sister lives with. And then 2, Snapchat is your friend. And I'm not sure if your shelter has Snapchat, but if it doesn't, it ought to, because that's how a way that young girls in particular who are very tech savvy with their cell phones, they can download that app, they can message you, they can get a message back, they can uninstall the app, so in case somebody looks at their, their cell phone, why do you have Snapchat on here? Who are you snapping with? They don't have to answer that question. And young girls and young people in general know how to do that, young boys as well too. So that's my story, that's why I'm here today. So thank you.
I don't introduce Leah. She has a video prepared as well, and she has grown up in the age of technology, so it's really been able to impact her in a much different, unique way as well.
I was afraid, I was a boy, I was a tender age. Mannequin naked, knew a lake and drew loves for pace. Heard a lot of waiting top, but no, it wasn't waiting up wide. Fall on its end, it was over, it'd all be bad. And the frost took up the eye. Pressed against the pain, could see the veins, and I was poisoned out. Resting in the rays, the inner claims I had breath to shake. Searching for an cup, maybe I'll take another bite wide. Honey in the hair, I feel the pails, and I let survey. And it wasn't in despair. With your heart.
The lights fade up and reveal me, a lone girl in a black dress, standing stage left. My image appears behind me, both our heads are turned down. The singer serenades the audience with, "I was unafraid, I was a boy, I was a tender age." My image and I begin to inform the audience that, simply put, everything is normal, everything is good. Even after we stumble, we decide to ignore the fall and push away doubt. But eventually, we begin to understand it's not normal and it's not good. Neither of us really allows ourselves to believe that, though, even while the image and I grow farther and farther apart. After being thrown to the ground repeatedly, I am forced to face the image again. We are now completely separate beings, looking at each other through a window. She disappears, and I am left alone on stage. It was a monster that tore us apart. I can feel the monster standing on stage with me. My fear throws me onto the floor, and I begin to panic as the image becomes further and further from my own truth, my own reality. She is obsolete, the image, the girl I was supposed to be, the girl before the monster. She is obsolete, lost, dead, and she haunts me. Eventually, I grow stronger, and I'm left alone on stage once again. The image comes back. However, now it appears that not only are we moving in opposite ways, we seem to move against one another. I realize I can never again be who I was before the monster, and the shadow of that girl is something I must rid myself of if I have any hopes of healing. We hear, "Love can hardly leave the room with your heart," and I face her for one last, final time. My strength makes her weak, and as I grow to heal, she slowly disintegrates behind me. Once more, the audience finds a lone, young girl in a black dress on stage. That girl is I, post-abuse, and I am a survivor. Doubt is so important when thank you. I go on that journey every time I watch. Doubt is so important when trying to understand the dynamics of abuse. In my case, doubt was everywhere I turned. I doubted my ability to stand alone on my own feet without my abuser. I doubted that relationships should be at all different from what I was experiencing and actually could have the potential to be better. I doubted my self-worth. I doubted that I deserved better. After being verbally tortured, physically threatened, and repeatedly sexually violated for over 9 months, I did find the strength to stop the doubt and start valuing myself enough to end the abuse. If only it could be that easy. After I had ended my relationship with my abuser, he broke into my home while my family and I were sleeping. He used my phone to text my friends about me, pretending to be me. He read my journal and watched me sleep. He began to stalk and threaten me through social media, creating multiple fake online accounts to harass myself and my close friends. He used apps to text me anonymously and called relentlessly just to leave threatening voicemails. This went on for months after we broke up. He was charged with 4 felonies a year later and ultimately went to prison for stalking. He was sentenced for 2 years, but was let out a year early. Fortunately, I have not heard from him since. In my case, technology initially made my life very scary. He was always with me, be it on my phone or on my computer, and he always had means with which to contact me and continue abusing me. Ultimately, however, I am grateful for the ease in which I was able to prove his stalking me. Everything you post on social media is permanent, and in this case, that proved to be an advantage to me. To this day, my heart races when I receive a phone call from an unknown number or a friend request from a name I don't recognize. I think the electronic stalking I underwent will always haunt me. I was given 5 to 7 minutes to tell this story. When the way in which I am supposed to tell that story is through verbal explanation, the task is nearly impossible. Words just do not suffice. That's why I use dance. Domestic violence is, simply put, ugly. Nobody wants to listen to an ugly story. When I dance, I make this story beautiful. The act of turning ugly into beautiful is so powerful that it stops people in their tracks and demands for them to watch, listen, and accept. I am getting through this through dance, and I'm going to stop others from experiencing it at all through dance as well. I am in the process of creating an organization that will use dance as a tool, not only to help survivors heal, but to stop the violence before it begins. We will perform in schools, emphasizing the dangers of these types of relationships through an artistic and beautiful manner. We will also offer dance as a therapeutic device for survivors of this travesty. My company will be called the Sunflower Project. Sunflowers defy all odds by physically turning themselves towards the sun. This is what I believe all survivors must do. Over the recent summer, my father, who is a documentary filmmaker, and I created a short film called Untold, in which we simply have a conversation about my story. It is candid and unscripted. We also interweave this dance piece into the film. It is something that will be shared in schools as well as shown at film festivals. It is the first step the Sunflower Project has taken in action against this tragedy. I'd like to end with something my father said to me in the car over the summer, as the film Untold was just a seedling of an idea in our heads. He said, "When you've been to hell and back, it gives you something you didn't have before. It gives you a necessity to view the world in a different way and the power to express that in a different way. That's the food of creativity." Thank you.
So as you can hear from all of our panelists' stories, technology is really key. It's needed to be integrated into the domestic violence field. And it can be used, we need to get a better understanding of it so we know better how to protect victims of domestic violence, as well as getting a better understanding of how we can use it as an asset, such as Snapchat and private messaging through Facebook. So today you really are part of, I think, a new movement in the domestic violence field to really take it to address kind of what Dean Flynn was saying earlier, to the next level and help the field grow. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and telling your story. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Carol Ann Peterson, who is the moderator of our next panel, Best Practices for Safety, and all of your students, Best Practices for Safety in the Age of Technology. Carol Ann?
But I'm not going to introduce all of the panelists. Their bios are in your programs, at least for two of them. But I do want to start with Tracy Webb, who's from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, senior trial attorney who does child abuse, family violence, and cyber crimes. And so I'm going to let her start because she does have a great PowerPoint to go with this. Tracy.
Oh, great. The technology starts. Thanks, Carol Ann. I appreciate that. All right, we're gonna get this. Everybody stretch and take a deep breath and all that good stuff.
Flow. So let me introduce at this point in time Christine Jerian, who's from the Mayor's Office, Director of Domestic Violence Programs and Services. So, Christine.
Can you hear me? There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to be here because of the mayor that we have today and the position that I have. The position that I'm in today in the mayor's office did not exist 6 months ago. We are lucky that we have a mayor who has been an ally and a champion for the DV community since he was a council member 12 years ago. And getting to be part of this administration and seeing his commitment and being part of that experience has been, for me, an opportunity. And when I was asked to serve on this panel, my first response was, well, I'm not exactly sure what that means coming from government. And I'm going to be very open in terms of how I share the conversation, because Kathy and I really talked about the role of government and what we can do in being a partner. One of the things that our office has done in the mayor has championed is the idea of sharing data and open data, and that we even have a website to share that, and I'll share that with you in case you're interested. And the whole idea around that is the mayor has invited the community to look at raw data that we ask all our departments to share online. So if you're doing research, if you're interested in developing an app, that we have that there. The second piece to that is there data that isn't there that could be there that the city can gather? So how can we as the city work with the community at large to figure out what we should be looking at if we aren't already looking at it, and does it make sense within the framework of the services the city provides? But the underlying base of that being, how can government be a conduit? How do we leverage the resources we have? And how can we be a partner in sharing information that can be used? We have seen from our office this process work in different ways. We've hosted a couple of hackathons already, and while not related to the topic here, we shared data about water, and we just usage, and there was a hackathon around, how do we save water? And so is there an opportunity to do something like that for the DV community with the data we have? Again, it's raw data. The experts are here at the table, they're in the universities. I won't continue to go on, but with the data, but you get my point. Ultimately being, how do we help serve the community in a way that we haven't done before, and that knowing that there's an administration here that is open to using data in technology to solve problems, and that we're here to be able to do that with you.
Okay, take two here. Hi, everybody. Okay, Tracy Webb is my name, as you heard. I kind of have 3 hats on today, or 2.5 hats, I guess, today. I am a criminal prosecutor, have been for 32 years, primarily in the area of crimes against children, and specializing probably in about the last 8 or 9 years in cyber crime and online exploitation. And as part of that, I work a federal task force, the Federal Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, which is a multi-agency task force that investigates and prosecutes cybercrime. I'm also a proud faculty member at my alma mater, the University of Southern California. So, 3 hats today. So I kind of have a lot of bad news for you as it relates to supporting victims and protecting victims of domestic violence when they're using social media, which is pretty much everybody these days. Because as you all know, we don't really have a day go by where we don't open up some kind of media, whether it's online media or turn on the television or listen to the radio or open up a newspaper or a magazine, and we see that cybercrime is on the rise, as this says, and we can't really get away from it. None of us are going to get rid of our technology. We're not going to get rid of our smartphones. We're not going to throw away our computers. So we kind of have to live with it. But as all of you know, as people who work with and support victims of domestic violence and other crimes, there's a lot of online victimization. We've heard about it just this morning, so much of it. And so we kind of, as those who support these victims, have to be aware, educate ourselves, keep up on the fact that technology is advancing so fast. Kids and young adults are so good at it. Every once in a while it is flawed, like this morning, but we live with that because technology is unfortunately unpredictable. But when we're talking about victimization and online victimization, especially of domestic violence victims, we have to think of it from a lot of different perspectives. We've heard this morning about the whole idea of stalking and cyber stalking. It's a huge problem, as you know, for all of us. Cyber harassment, also, we've heard about this morning, huge problem. Revenge porn, I'm going to talk about a little bit, and then the different kinds of cyber attacks. It's all over the place. And so when we think about the idea of violence and abuse and people being violated and people being abused, we have to include the fact that it isn't just physical, it isn't just in person, but it happens online. It happens via computers and smartphones and all these other all these other technologies that so many people use so often. And so I think the basic premise that we all need to remember, sort of going into this knowledge is power idea, is that every single solitary time we use any type of technology, whether it's a video game, whether it's a text message, whether it's a smartphone, whether it's an image, whether it's a photo, we leave a trace of ourselves behind. And that's every single time. With all due respect to Mike, there is nothing that's private on the internet. Not Snapchat, not Facebook, not text messages, nothing. So we have to go into it knowing that, and I'll deal with that a little bit more. But this premise that's up on the screen right now is that every time we do anything, we leave a trace of ourselves behind, which means somebody knows where we are, what we're doing, what we've done, where we've been online. And that, in my law enforcement world, with my law enforcement hat on, that's really cool, because we call it evidence. And that means we can hold perpetrators accountable when they do things to other people. But in our world, in our victims' world, this is not so great. And I'll show you why with a few examples. Because what it does is it builds all of our digital reputation. Every single one of us has a virtual version of what's on the screen right now, a digital footprint. Everything we do goes into our digital footprint. And it's really not that hard for somebody with even a tangential amount of technological ability to track down and find out different parts of our digital reputation. And because of that, and because we're all putting together this digital footprint that follows us for the rest of our lives, we have to do everything we're doing online understanding this concept of no privacy. We want it to be private. We want to feel like when we're in the privacy of our own homes, behind our own screen, or in front of our own little powerful digital computer in the palm of our hand, we want to believe it's private. 20 some odd years ago, when the internet was invented, it would have been super cool if somebody had put something in the Constitution that said we have a right to privacy online, but they didn't, so we don't. And so those of you who are scientifically minded, there's a Venn diagram for you. That should exemplify very carefully for you that there is, in fact, no connection between the internet that we all use every day and privacy. There just isn't. So we have, and as I said, we're not going to throw away our technology, but we have to use it knowing this. And we have to make sure that the victims we're supporting and serving get this. And so let's take just a few minutes and look at sort of what's out there, what's new, what's still going on, what's popular with the people that you're serving every day. Everybody familiar with Foursquare? Anybody out there familiar with Foursquare? Foursquare's not new, but it's still super popular. Young adults, some high school kids, really, really popular. For those of you who don't know, because most of you didn't raise your hand, this is a sort of a social media game check-in app, if you will. You go places, and when you go there, you check in. And the game part of it is when you go there and you check in, you get a point. So if you were to go to Target, do your weekly Target shopping or whatever you do, and while you're waiting in line, you open up your Foursquare app on your smartphone, and you check in and you get a point. And if you go to Target enough, you get enough points, you can be the mayor of Target. I know you all aspire to that, right? And so it seems kind of harmless, kind of silly. But people do it, and there are businesses on Foursquare that have, coupons and things like that, discounts. So it's basically harmless, right? Let me give you an example of the non-harmless part of it. I'll use myself as an example. I'm not on Foursquare, but if I was, here's how it might work in my life. And Foursquare is a smartphone app, so you could all have it on your Android or your Apple phones. So if I had Foursquare, here I'll tell you two things about me. These are two fairly secret things about me. The first thing is I'm a creature of habit. I tend to do kind of the same thing every day in the same way. And the second thing is I am incredibly addicted to coffee. Okay? So now you know. So I live in Pasadena. I work in downtown Los Angeles. I leave my house in Pasadena at about the same time every morning, usually around 6 in the morning, and I take the same route, Huntington Drive, to downtown LA. And so that's what I do every day, big deal, right? So the good news about my coffee addiction is that in between my house in Pasadena and my office downtown, it's 9 miles, I pass 5 Starbucks. That's the good news for me. I always stop at the same one, because I'm a creature of habit. So I stop at the one at Fremont and Huntington. I go in, I get my coffee, I go to work. That's my day. I get to the Fremont and Huntington Starbucks at about 10 after 6 in the morning. Okay, so if I were on Foursquare or one of these other check-in apps, while I'm waiting for my coffee in the morning, I would check in. And I'd get a point. I would for sure be the mayor of that Starbucks. No doubt about it, right? So, and then I get my so I check in, I get my coffee, I go to work, right? Well, remember that slide a couple slides ago? We leave a trace of ourselves behind. If I'm at the same place every weekday morning at the same time doing the same thing, and I'm checking in online, I'm leaving a trace of myself behind. Which means if somebody wanted to find me, which they don't, but if they did, they would know 6:10 every weekday morning, you're going to find me at that Starbucks. And so, nobody's looking for me, but we see this all the time with these various check-in apps, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Instagram, wherever it happens to be. We see it all the time in kidnapping cases. We see it in stalking cases all the time. We see it in restraining order cases, domestic violence cases, child abduction cases. Because it's so easy to find people because they put that information out there. And so you have to know this in order to educate the victims you're working with and educate them that they're leaving a trace of themselves behind, even on these sort of harmless, innocuous apps like Foursquare and some of the others. And, the extra bad news in the last year or two is everything's connected via GPS. And so all these smartphones now all have GPS-enabled everything. So we got check-in apps with GPS, and then everything's now connected to everything else. It used to be you had social media, Facebook or Instagram or Tumblr or whatever it was, were standalone social media sites. Now they all connect to everything else. And how annoying is that was, you can check in, but you can check in via Facebook. Well, I don't have Facebook, so how are you going to do that? So they're all connected to everything else, which takes the level of privacy down even lower. So you've got apps like this, where they will automatically, whether you like it or not, tell you who's around, where they are, and then GPS map them for you. And so this becomes potentially, as you guys are all nodding and getting it, potentially really dangerous. So I'm going to give you an example before I close here of photos, because we all know everybody loves taking pictures. Everybody with a smartphone, it's almost impossible to find a phone that doesn't have a camera, which is really good if we always want to have a camera with us. We'll never again go to Disneyland and say, oh, I forgot my camera, because we all have smartphones that all have cameras. And then not only do we like taking the pictures, but we like sharing the pictures with our friends and families. So we take pictures of birthday parties and celebrations, and then we send them to our relatives all over the country and all over the world. Everybody does it. But we have to do it with the knowledge of a couple of different things. One of which is the whole idea of geotagging, which is probably not a new concept to any of you, but it's still around, and it's still limiting the amount of privacy that we have. So those of you who don't know what geotagging is the idea that when you take a picture with a smartphone, a digital device, either a camera or a cell phone, you take it. Your device saves the image. Say it's a picture of your puppy, and so you take a picture of your new puppy. So you've got the image, but behind that image, what you can't see is all sorts of information known as metadata. So the way it works is you take a picture. In the nanosecond that it takes to upload that picture to, Shutterfly or Picasa, whatever photo sharing site you're using. The image goes, that image of your puppy, plus that metadata. So you upload it on the internet, the metadata is there, and so is the picture of the puppy. So, wherever you're posting it, wherever it happens to be online, whether it's any one of these sites or anything else, there's the image and the metadata. So if you wanted to look at the metadata, it would look something like this, the screen. I know it's too small for you guys to read, but this all the information about a particular picture. It'll tell you it was taken with a Nikon D90 camera, the aperture, the shutter speed, the pixel size, all that good stuff. It also has the latitude and longitude of where the picture was taken. and which, if you think about it, is super valuable information if you want to find out where somebody is. And so when we first started talking about this is years now. This is 5-6 years we've been talking about geotagging. When we first started talking about it, it did not compute in my brain at all. I was like, what? Metadata and latitude, and how does that work? So I did an experiment, my own little experiment. So I was on vacation up north in Big Sur, and I took this picture when I was having lunch outside on a patio at a restaurant in Big Sur. So I took this picture, I had a BlackBerry at the time. So I took this picture and I sent it down here to one of our forensic detectives in LA. And I said, guess where I am? And then I went back to eating lunch. I was kind of mean to somebody who was at work and I was on vacation, but I did it anyway. So this is the Pacific Ocean, and so I go back to eating lunch. So a minute or two goes by, and the detective sends me this. So there's the screen of the metadata, right? Another minute or two goes by, and he sends me this. So now we have the satellite photo. There's that Pacific Ocean. So there's the satellite photo, and he's put in there the latitude and longitude of where the picture is. So creepy, right? So I've now lost my appetite. So he's indicated right there on Highway 1 where the latitude and longitude is. So then another minute or two goes by, and he sends me this. So he has copy and pasted the latitude and longitude into Google Maps, and now he has the address of the restaurant that I'm having lunch in, solely based on the picture that I sent him, right? And then you see this that green arrow that the red arrow is pointing to? That's the chair I'm sitting in at the restaurant. So technology is a pretty amazing thing. Now, this is a super cool piece of technology if you want somebody to come and meet you there for lunch, right? Meet us here for lunch tomorrow, right? But the flip side is what I was talking about with Foursquare. If you're putting out there on the internet pictures of, where you're having lunch or your vacation or your puppy, then that information is out there for people to fairly easily access. And think about that picture of the puppy. How many of us have never, ever, ever taken and posted a picture that we took inside our house? We do it all the time. And so we post it out there, and now it's fairly easy for somebody to figure out where we live. And so that's something that the victims you're dealing with and the victims you're serving and supporting need to understand, that even sort of an innocuous picture of a super cool restaurant can get you in trouble if you aren't careful. And so the takeaway, the good news, if I have any for you, is all your location services and your victim's phone location services should always be off. I have 2 cell phones. My location services are off all the time. It is super annoying because any app you want to use, map app, whatever you want to use, you got to go in, you got to manually turn it off, turn it back on, all that kind of stuff. It's annoying, but it's better than the alternative, as far as violating our privacy. Every single device, this happens to be an iPhone, you can turn off all the location services, or you can turn them off now individually on the 5 and 6 Apple phones. My suggestion is turn them all off and then turn them on individually if you need to. So closing out here, I know I'm going over time, I apologize, Caroline. Using technology to stalk people is hugely common. In the last year, we've exploded with new apps that are solely dedicated to the purpose of stalking people. And that's sort of horrifying. We have a couple some people might say fairly innocuous ones. GPS tracker, and this is called FlexSpy. The only purpose these apps serve is to track people and spy on people. That's what they do. Recently, there have been a couple of sort of super creepy ones that I'll tell you about just so you're aware of them in case it comes up with your victims. The first one is called Creepy, aptly named, I think. They called it Creepy because it is. And all this is a GPS-enabled app you put on your phone. If you've got the person's cell phone number, you can stalk them. The second one that's also really, really commonly used right now, and 2 weeks from now these may change, but right now, this one's called Stalker. I thought that was a very clever name. Stalker. And again, you have somebody's cell phone number, and you can use these apps to find out where they are, actually where their cell phone is, but it's usually with them. This one down here is fairly new. I just think it's really interesting, and it shows you how sophisticated the technology is. This one's called Wingman. What this does is it uses technology to tap in to the cell phones that are on the airplane you're sitting on. So what it will do, it will take advantage of the fact that we all have digital boarding passes, and so it will tap into these cell phones on your airplane, your Delta Airlines flight to Miami, whatever it is, and it will tell you not only that that cell phone is on that airplane, it will tell you the seat they're in, assuming they had a digital boarding pass, and it will tell you exactly how many minutes you have to contact them before the plane arrives at its destination. So really specific, detailed, and creepy technology, if you will. And this final one here is called NameTag. This one is a fairly new app that helps you stalk somebody with facial recognition software. So if you have their photo, if you use your camera to take their photos, say in a Starbucks or an airplane waiting room, any place like that, it will use that facial recognition software, that's a mouthful, to match to their social media profile photos. So all those photos that are out there in cyberspace, it'll match the photo that you have on the NameTag app to whatever photos are out there, and then connect that, because of the information that's out there, to their cell phone and tell you where they are. So that's sort of where we've come in the area of cyber stalking. It's very sophisticated technology that's very readily available. And so you're getting the stalking, and then you're also getting the threatening, harassing messages that we've heard some stories about today, via text, via social media, whatever they happen to be. So I'll close out with the whole idea of revenge porn. Revenge porn was just recently made against the law in California. This just happens to be the code section. Revenge porn is hugely, hugely popular. Popular in quotes, obviously. These are some of the most common apps right now for revenge porn. Facebook, for some reason, Facebook is pretty good at security, at taking it down, but not always so fast. You got posted you may have read in the media, there was a revenge porn case down in San Diego using the revenge porn app. The most popular one right now seems to be this one here called Hamster. I have no idea why they call it Hamster, but it seems to be the one that's the most popular. And I will caution you on your temptation, I will tell you right now, will be to check my information when you get home, and you will Google Hamster. I'm telling you right now, don't try this at home. I'll tell you right now what will happen, just to alleviate your curiosity, okay? First of all, those of you who are parents, you will be tempted at some point in your lives, it happened to me, to buy your children a hamster. Don't. And here's why. Because, well, first of all, you don't want a small rodent in your house. Just saying. But if you buy kids these days a pet, like a hamster, the first thing digital native kids are going to do is they're going to Google it to find out how to take care of it, right? So either you're going to go home tonight and check my information, or your kids are going to Google it because you bought them a hamster. Here's what will happen. If you go to Google and you type in hamster, this is what will happen. The first hit you're going to get is going to be Wikipedia. Obviously, right? Wikipedia will tell you that a hamster is a small rodent. You already know that, so you don't need to Google it. All of the rest of the hits are going to be this site. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see the language, and it's got photos, and you don't want to see the photos. So trust me on this one, don't Google hamster, but know that hamster, for some reason right now, if you hear your victims or other people in your life talking about it, is a particularly prolific and awful revenge porn site. So there are a lot of ideas and a lot of people who are creating sort of digital safety, especially geared towards domestic violence and sexual assault victims. IBM Security has created a couple of different apps and websites to do it, but they're warning everyone, as will I, that hackers and perpetrators are out there. And it's interesting with this, they're talking about digital dating safety. And you probably can't see the highlight in there, but what it says is 63% of the these safety apps have severe security vulnerabilities. And my guess is this 63% is on the low side. So just sort of know that even with the apps that purport to keep people protected, there is, go back to that, no connection between the internet and privacy. So anything that goes out there we have to know when we're putting it out there, it's not going to be private, and it's fairly easy for anybody to access. So this is obviously just the tip of the iceberg, and I apologize for going over, but you get the idea. So without taking any more time, it's all back to you. There you go.
It makes me feel good that I still do a lot of things old school. We're going to hear now regarding clients and services and the issue of technology. Thank you.
Hello, I hope the sound is on. My name is Irma Saidikovic. I am the COO and co-founder of an agency called the Village Family Services. I have been asked to come and talk to you today. I have been working on the field of domestic violence for more than 25 years. I used to run with the police department from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning to homes after they were secured to help victims of domestic violence. I did that for a long time, and I ran domestic violence groups for victims and their children. We ran around 16 groups at the same time with a group of therapists during 7 years of my life. This is the population that I feel for, and I have a big place in my heart. And as I have been lucky enough to open an organization, as we place the organizational structure and policies and procedures and train staff, this is always very present. There are many areas that we have to train staff, and when I talk about staff, I talk about therapists that work in the mental health area, paraprofessionals that work with parents and children. So we have a level of education that it varies, but we all have access to internet, we all have access to electronic health records, and we have to be very careful about how we allow people into a file, into a note, into a record, into an incident report, into a child abuse report, into a domestic violence situation that happened. So there must be policies in place to be able to secure the safety of the clients. We all have the best intentions, and we all come from that idea that we have the best intentions, but sometimes there is information that is disclosed and it's not necessary. So when we do provide policies, and for example, a client comes and engages in treatment, we have to be very careful on taking the time to explain the consequences of signing a release, or what confidentiality means. Signing a release, or for how long that release is available for anyone to ask for records, how this has to be in a written form, how we have to have procedures about how we can disclose. And I have been engaging attorneys right and left because I always advocate for privacy, and I always refuse, and I know that I have an attorney on the table. Many times they ask for records. I always refuse to release records, and I do everything I can until I have a judge that says to me, you have to bring the records. And I do that, and it has a cost, but it also has this feeling of consciousness about protecting the children, protecting the victims, protecting them to the last minute. And also we train staff about documentation. How much you write, how much you document. And we need the documentation. We are being paid by the Department of Mental Health. We need to document. But we have to be very careful about what we document and the implications of the release of records. If we write something about a diagnosis that could affect a child as that person matures and wants to go into the military, and that could affect the way that that person could be accepted or rejected. So there are many levels of policy and administration that get into place when we work with the vulnerable populations that we work with. We have an IT department, we have to work with them, understand what are the limitations of our security, what are the things that need to be captured, and what are the things that we cannot do. Like, for example, internally, we have a policy: you do not place a name of a client on a subject line, ever, even if it's internally. You never know. There are many things that if we send information out, it's all encrypted. And that doesn't mean it's completely secure. Like, you know, I'm listening to you, and I have this old school, like, do not text clients, do not email clients. And sometimes I have very young professionals who really challenge, and I want to hear them. But I listen to you. I just reinforce my idea that I am old, but I will continue with this old school idea of protecting the client. Because how do you protect the client when you are texting them, when you're responding via email? For example, we have a reminder of appointments for clients. When the client comes the first time, we say, you know, we can call you every week. It's an automatic system. We call you and let you know that you have an appointment. I had to say to the people that was placing this new policy in place, wait. Do you have a place that you ask the person, do you have a problem when we call you? Do you have a problem if we text you? Do we place you in danger if we do that? So there are many layers, and like I said, people have the best intentions, but they don't have the training about what is domestic violence, what means to be stalked, what means to have control over the other person and trying to control everything. The same thing with the children that have iPhones and have, you know, media with them all the time. Sometimes the mothers are aware, but the adolescents, it's very difficult for them to be disconnected from their friends. How do we deal with that? Because it can place not only the mother in danger, not only the children in danger, other clients in danger. When they know where they receive services, somebody's being stalked, and they find out where they are. It's not only that person, it's everybody else who is coming to the center. So there is many layers of awareness and security levels that we have to have. And also therapists. I had a situation in which I hired a director for an outpatient program. She came to me one day after a month and a half, and she said, I have been stalked by a client for several years. He just found out that I am working here. She decided to leave the job. And the effort that we place in having a position like that being, you know, fulfilled with a person with the skills that we need, but I definitely understood exactly where she was coming from. And we have to engage our HR department and say how we can support her in this transition, how we can keep her safe until the last day she stays here, what arrangement she needs. So there are many levels in administration that we have to provide for support. It's not only for the clients only, it's also for our staff. When we allow the client to sign a release, what kind of release of information? How we can try to coach them somehow, or at least explain in detail what that means and who they are going to release information to. They are not aware what are the implications, so we have to be very careful. Or they come and say, oh, share that with the school, there is no problem. Share that with them. Say, wait, we don't have to share all of this. We want to collaborate with other agencies, but we have to take care of the clients that come in and they don't have the information and awareness about the implications of disclosing information. We have community partners and we work together and collaborate. We don't do every single service. We need the support of the community, but there is a limitation on how much we have to say. The client has the right to disclose what the client wants to disclose, but we as professionals have the it's an obligation for us to really protect the people who come through the door and see us. As an organization, we need to clear and have fingerprints of the staff and be sure that the staff is clear and we don't have a person who can put at risk everybody else. So in general, I personally would like to talk from my clinical point of view about domestic violence, but I have been invited to talk more from the administration point of view. But I want you to be aware, because wherever you go and work, it will be important that if they don't have these policies in place, if they are not aware that you do raise the issue, be vocal about it, be outspoken, raise the issue, be an advocate. Thank you so much.
Just a couple of things, sort of going a little bit to what Dean Flynn said. These are the same exact discussions I had on a joint task force at the state level on welfare reform 20 years ago. So makes me a little unhappy we're still having these discussions. But in the time we have left, we wanted to have open this up for some Q&A. So if you all have some questions of the panelists, please feel free to ask them. Now is your time.
Good afternoon, or good morning. Barry, I don't think I need that, Barry. Oh, you recording. My name is Bernita Walker. I'm the Executive Director of Project Peacemakers. We are contracted with the City of Los Angeles to provide DART response in 4 of the LAPD divisions, primarily South Los Angeles. My question is to the young lady that just spoke. It was very difficult to hear you at times. That's why I kept. Is what you have written somewhere that we can receive it, because your information was extremely important? I mean, everybody's was important. Don't misunderstand me. But we could hear Tracy and Christine, we just couldn't hear you.
I would be happy to share policies and procedures that we have in place and somehow make a summary of what I have talked. I'm so sorry that you couldn't understand. But I will be happy. I will be happy if I have the information or the email. I will be, I can send it to Kathleen, and Kathleen can probably send to all of you.
I was getting ready to say all 3 of them have my information, so you can just give it to them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for the young lady.
Hi, my name is Leanne Brodsky. I'm a student in the USC School of Social Work, and I'm actually interning in Mayor Garcetti's Office of Veterans Affairs. I had a question for Ms. Webb, specifically talking about those apps and all the horrifying things that come from them. I'm wondering if either from a legal perspective or for all of you kind of in the movement, if there's a pushback, if there's anything that can be done to block them from the App Store or things like that, or sort of if there's a thought on sort of how to move forward.
It's a thorn in our side every day, and I get that question all the time. Usually somebody jumping up and down saying, hey, you have this fancy task force, why don't you shut those things down if they're victimizing people? Normally, and we try all the time, normally the apps that are the most dangerous and the ones that I usually talk about and point out are usually based somewhere else in some other country where we don't have jurisdiction. And the ones that that are in a country where we have diplomatic relations, we can usually have some kind of a civil conversation with them. But most of these apps, at least the ones I showed you today, aren't based here. And so they usually don't answer the phone when we call to say, can you please take that down? So it's very, very frustrating, but we work really hard with other governments. We work a lot with Interpol and with the various law enforcement organizations all over the world. But it's very, very hard because, and even the ones that sometimes are based in places that we have jurisdiction, we'll get like a First Amendment argument where we have freedom of speech. And so it's a very, very complicated legal issue that we try every day to deal with. Good question.
A recent Supreme Court case that allowed cyberstalking and said it wasn't really a crime after all, and had the man released from prison. Could you address that and how that's affected other cases?
Between Tracy and I will try and address this. It actually was the Alanis case that was mentioned earlier today. Basically, it came down partly to freedom of speech, because what it indicated was that he was not posting ranting and ravings about his ex-girlfriend. Mm-hmm. It was the fact that he was doing song lyrics and expressing how he felt. And so the Supreme Court indicated in that particular case this was not an issue of stalking, that this was not an issue of threats, but it was an issue of freedom of speech.
I thought it was the one where he threatened to kill her and they said any reasonable man.
In song lyrics.
Without a big explanation about constitutional law, we spent a lot of time looking at that case, assuming that's the one you're talking about, and it did come down to that First Amendment issue. And the courts usually will do sort of an analysis where they'll look at something called time, place, and manner of the speech. And so the way they analyzed it, and it was a rather complicated opinion, but to say the least, I guess. But the way they analyzed it was based on the song lyrics. It was more about feelings rather than threats. And so when they were sort of weighing the time, place, and manner in which what we would consider threats were disseminated, they found that it wasn't. So I think there's still a long way for the law to go in that area, but it was there was a lot of jumping around and reading and rereading of that case when it came down.
And I think that's also part of the issue, is that the law has not kept up with the technology. It's moving so fast, so rapidly, that our laws are unable to really keep up with what we need to do to protect, victims, citizens, and, just even our children. Other questions? Real quickly, in the time we have left of each of our panel.
I'm a researcher for ICANN. I've been looking at data. And Dr. Michael Durfee gave me a lot of data of fatalities for domestic violence. And I've been looking at that, charting it, and looking at all that stuff. And I was on the phone with Dr. Durfee yesterday. We were talking about technology and violence and homicides. And so I was explaining to Dr. Durfee the premise of this whole process. Is there's a big disconnect between the qualitative analysis process, which is the human health services, the stuff that we all do as human health services, social workers, whatnot, and a big divide between the quantitative process, the technical process, the algorithms, mathematical computation scores, that get down to the nuts and bolts of the actual data. What does it mean in representation of the big whole? And it's very difficult when you get a room full of folks from ICANN that are all human health services, and on one side you get all the technologists. Because what you have is a room when someone speaks German and someone speaks Spanish, and they're looking at each other. Where do we go next? And from my perspective, and dealing with all the homicide data, until we resolve that, I can see us really going down to the nuts and bolts of what does data actually mean, the process of it. And I'm hoping I see things moving through ICANN, 211, Mark Lee Thomas's office. They're all engaged in this metadata process in such a way it's becoming granular. And I think by February, March or April, you see a big change. So that's my 2 cents.
Respond. In terms of, again, partnering, because probably some of the data that you're talking about for the homicides is coming from city-county level. If there is an opportunity for us to work together, or if we can help bring the two groups together and help facilitate the conversations, if that's not happening organically, like how can our office, or even at the county level, but I'm here representing the city, how can our office help facilitate what you just explained? Because I think that's what we might be able to do.
Durfee on your behalf, and I'll call Deanne Chilton, and I'll set up a meeting for you, just one-on-one with both of them. Basically, what they do, they have access to the coroner's data, and Dr. Durfee is always communicating with the coroner's office and doing a lot of work, and also is connecting to other medical doctors and researchers from across the U.S. Matter of fact, Dr. Durfee and I are going to an APHA conference in Chicago in 2 weeks, and we're talking about what does violence mean from a fatality perspective. We're doing a presentation, and so we're hoping to get some more researchers on board, and so that's literally, we'll be up there on October 31st.
Thank you.
Wanted each of the panelists, if they would, 1 or 2 safety tips that we can pass on to you as social workers, to you in the field, to those of you even for family and friends. So Irma, if you'd like to jump in with 1 or 2 safety tips.
I will say awareness, raising awareness for the people who come and work with you, and how we must be aware and give the time for the people to decide about how they will release information, how they will allow confidentiality information to go out, how we limit the time, how you work with your staff about privacy, and how you limit access. I know that we all want to know what's going on with the case, but it's not necessary to know everything. So that will be my statement.
The city and sharing data, what would be helpful for us is, we're putting out raw data, and for the community to look at the data that we have and let us know if there are issues, because we are just sharing information out there, and we are putting out information from police reports potentially and data coming from LAPD, and having the DV community look at that data, it comes back to us and helps us figure out to do exactly what was just said, is the awareness of confidentiality. And we don't have the same frame sometimes that the community has, and so again, that partnership and that relationship. So while it's not a tip specifically for you, it's more of a request, again, to partner with us so that we can be part of that solution as well. So I welcome all of you to connect with me afterwards if you're interested in doing that.
Stay off the internet. Well, you asked. No, I think I'm actually not really kidding, but I am. I think I echo what you guys said, and that is that the awareness piece, which would be educating yourselves and keep educating yourselves on what's out there, what's new, and then spread that awareness and that knowledge to your clients as far as the lack of privacy and the dangers that exist out there.
And one last piece. Don't post that you're going to be gone for the next 3 weeks on the internet, because you've just opened it up for the whole world to know where you are or track you. But I wanted to thank the panelists and all the information that they shared, and for all of you. And Miss Kathleen, it's yours.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. I'd like to invite our last group of panelists down. This is our final panel of the morning. And thank you so much for tolerating the traffic and the technology summit here at the AT&T Center. Everyone take a microphone. It's kind of like Meet the Press, but different. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists, our illustrious crew here. This is Barbara Palmer, the Chief Revenue Officer from CallFire. Alan Silverberg from Digijax.com. And Grant Langston from eHarmony. We're going to be talking about advocacy, policy, products, and services. and how that has an impact not only in this category, but in growing healthy relationships. So we're going to start with Barbara talking about an advocacy position they took earlier this year.
Part of speaking on a panel is speaking into a microphone. Good morning, and thank you for having me here. My day job is different than the reason that I'm here today. So my day job is that I work for a company that supports text and voice platforms for companies to communicate with their prospects and their customers. What that tells me is that texting, cell phones, technology are ubiquitous. Everybody has access. And I am no longer shocked to know that people who are homeless prioritize their cell phone ahead of a place to sleep. And that was eye-opening to me, just in terms of it is everywhere and everyone is using it. The reason I'm here today is that we took a policy position earlier this year and put a change.org petition up to advocate for text to 911 technology at all levels of government throughout the country. Because I was shocked to hear that it's not in place. And if I were in an emergency situation, I would want to communicate in any way possible and in the safest way possible, and oftentimes text is that solution. So if you didn't know, it takes a lot less cell service to get an SMS text out than it does to get a call out. And if you didn't know, every phone, whether it's a smartphone or not, is SMS enabled, meaning that you can send a text from any phone. Your flip phone, the phone that your kids make fun of you for still having, doesn't matter. You can get a text out. And if you think about domestic violence, or you think about other scenarios where a call doesn't make sense because of danger or because of the person's ability to speak, then text is a wonderful solution for safety. And so we are advocating for text to 911 to be put in, and just so you know, there are very few states right now that have it at all. And in some states, like the state of California, you have to have it at the local level. It's not put in once for the entire state. And so we are advocating the signatures to get local representatives to really advocate for the cost, and there is a cost to the infrastructure, but more importantly, the education. And we can go into some of the pushback, but that's why I'm here today. And we spoke to a very brave and incredible woman at the shelter who was able to text to a family member to let them know where she was in her time of danger, and it saved her life. And that's the story that I keep in my head as we advocate for change and allowing text to 911. I'm not saying replace phone calls. I'm saying give another alternative, especially to a generation, as I like to say, my kids don't know how to talk on the phone because they're constantly texting. They would not, in a moment of need, think to make a phone call. They would text.
That's a nice opening. How many people here knew that you could not text or assumed that you could text to 911? Everyone thought? You assumed you could text to 911. Yeah. I did too. I'm right there. It's been so ubiquitous for so many years that it really seems logical that we're not able, in the state of California, as we sit here, if we're in danger, in not only a domestic violence situation, but we do kind of have those earthquakes. And texts take up a lot less bandwidth, as Barbara said, that enables you to get help. So it's an important consideration as you're looking at those types of service providers and advocating for particular points of view, is how can you get help quickly? Alan, I think you have something to say about that.
My company specializes in dealing with socially engineered attacks and trying to help companies and individuals who are getting stalked prevent that. You can actually use text to tweet, so you can from an SMS platform make a tweet on Twitter so it's a public. So if you really need to make an announcement, or I'm really in danger and I need help right now, you can text to Twitter and then it's public. So it's not just going to someone else's phone, but it's going to the world. Some of the other social media platforms also have similar ability to do that. You have to look into it. You have to have there's a little code you put into it, but it's easy once you do it. So I just wanted to add that.
I was going to add, in the midst of doing the change.org petition, there was a very apropos news story, which was that someone in a dangerous situation ordered a pizza on their phone from Pizza Hut. And if you haven't heard this story, it's pretty incredible. They had the presence of mind to order a pizza and in the comments say, "I'm being held hostage in my home, call 911 now." And so there is technology for different purposes that if you were creative and in that moment had the presence to do it, but it's the same situation. Know the capabilities of technology so that you can use them until we can get the systems in place, which hopefully will then be more adopted.
Grant, tell us a little bit about eHarmony and how you're protecting relationships online.
Hello.
Just a test to make sure we're all awake.
I'll hold it back here. Thanks, Kathleen. When we think about security, individual security at eHarmony, thank you. I've been told I have a loud voice, but that's something else. We look at two kinds of problems. First of all is, of course, financial fraud, which is something that's pervasive all over the internet. Anywhere there's money, there are people coming and trying to trick people or steal it from them. So that's a big problem, but then we also look at the other side of it, which is violence and cyber stalking and individual protection of your person, frankly. These are issues that we did not foresee. I was part of the team that launched the company back in 2000, and we thought it was going to be all lightness and roses, bringing people together for serious relationships. And what you find is that there are statistically, it happens rarely. I think it's important for me to just say, in our world, statistically, most people have no problems with these issues. And I don't want to mislead you, but the repercussions of it are so dramatic and so terrible that we need to spend some time talking about it. And also, a lot of the things that people can do to prevent these things from happening to them are relatively simple in our world. And we spend a lot of time making videos, and I spend a lot of time talking at conferences and to the media about these very simple ways that people can prevent themselves from being taken advantage of. And it's often surprising, but the biggest problem we have is that people think it cannot happen to them. Everybody says, well, I could never be scammed. But of course, the people that do it are so good that, of course you can. And I think one of the things that I want to spend some time talking about today are the ways that those things happen and why, why it seems amazing that it is a pervasive problem, but it is. And if you can just make a few changes to the way that you conduct yourself, I would not suggest you get off the internet, although that might solve some problems. But I think you can raise your level of security greatly with a few simple steps. Well, I guess the first one, I can sort of go across the spectrum, but let's talk about the first thing that is the most likely in the world of security, and that is some sort of financial fraud, some sort of scam. What people don't understand is that most of the time these scams are professional corporations. They're criminal enterprises. It's not a guy in his basement who's making up profiles and trying to trick you. They are in countries in Africa or Southeast Asia, and they have hundreds of employees, and they work all day to create profiles and to communicate with people. They are also willing to nurture the relationship with you for a long time. I think people are surprised. They say to themselves, wow, I can't believe he was lying to me. We've been talking for 6 months. I've loaned him money 3 times and he's paid it back to me. But when I finally loaned him $15,000, I never heard from him again. And so they're smart enough to understand that they need to draw you out. They need to engender some trust from you. And so that means a lot of time on their side. And so the easiest way you can protect yourself from ever falling victim to that is simply making a commitment. Write it on your refrigerator if you need to, or involve your family. You will never, ever, ever send money to anyone you meet on the internet. Ever, ever, ever. No matter what, no matter when they tell you that they're in the hospital or their child's in the hospital, or yes, you know, I'm in the middle of this big business deal and my money's tied up and I'll pay you next week. There's no amount of excuse that can make you send them money. And if you'll hold to that, you will go a long way to preventing that kind of fraud from ever happening.
Alan, your company does a lot of work in and around those types of protections. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't want to screech into the microphone. I think that one of the things that people have to look at with all these platforms is what information are you putting out and when? Why? So if you're in a situation where you've been stalked or someone's coming after you, or there's an abusive person in your life, you can actually use this technology to obfuscate yourself, to hide yourself, to be somewhere else than you actually are. Yes, maybe you shouldn't be on the internet, you shouldn't be posting, I'm going to be away for 3 weeks. Unless you're doing it intentionally, you're not really going to be away, and you're actually saying, hey, I'm going to be in Florida for a few weeks or whatever, but you're actually right where you are. So sometimes if you have a dangerous person coming after you, you can actually trap that person. Thank you. Or use social media to get them almost like a lure. If you know they're following you, you can use this technology to lure them. And then you can go back to the police or to the lawyers and say, hey, here's the proof right here. This person's just continuing nonstop. There's also other ways in which you should be looking at your mobile devices and basically have the location turned off all the time, unless you're looking for directions somewhere or you're lost. There's no reason that you should be broadcasting your location when you take a picture, or when you send an SMS message, or when you send an email, or when you go on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. There's just no reason for any of us, but especially if you're in a situation where there's some sort of domestic violence or someone stalking you. And also, and we were talking about this earlier, it's very important for all of us to be aware, and law enforcement to be aware, that there's there's a number of companies that their entire livelihood is making fake social media accounts. So to feed these sort of hacking cartels, as I call them, there's actually software that creates fake LinkedIn accounts, fake Facebook accounts, fake Twitter accounts. And it's becoming really, really difficult to tell the difference between a faked account that's done by one of these pieces of software and a person. And so this is something that I think companies like eHarmony are really being forced to deal with right now, is not just sort of the idea of a hacker or groups of hackers, but now you actually have technology designed to help people be someone else, or to help a computer be another computer. And so these are all emerging threats that I think we kind of all have to be looking at it in a big scope of things. But also, it really comes down to the person. So all of us have access to technology, whether you have a smartphone or a dumb phone, as they're called, little flip phones. But we all have access to the internet. We all have access to tools and resources. So the question is, how do you educate yourself or the people who rely on you to get this kind of help? And one thing is to sit there and Google a lot. Google, you can basically use it like your own question and answer session. And just start asking questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? And pretty soon you'll start to see, and this is true for the bad guys too, there's all sorts of websites out there, how to hack, how to steal, how to become someone else. And you don't have to go on the so-called dark web to find this. It's there now. A couple of years ago, you kind of had to look around and figure it out. But now you just Google it. But the same goes for people who aren't criminals. You can Google your way to help. And so if you're in a situation, especially if you have some time, take that time and figure it out.
I was actually just going to mention another tool. Who here knows what two-factor authentication is? If you don't, it's a really easy thing for you to start doing. So it used to be that your password protected access to your accounts, to your email, whatever. There's now two-factor authentication, which when you go to log in to your account, it actually will send a code to your cell phone, which you then enter in. So it's enter your password, then get a code on your cell phone, then enter that in. If you're not holding the cell phone that's tied to that account, you won't be able to get the code. So they know that it's not you. It's another simple thing. Does it protect you entirely? No, but it's one step further than just putting in a password, and is the next step in protecting your identity online, your habits online, any information that you're entering online. I waffle between get yourself off of social media. I'm the last stander. I don't have a Facebook account. But if you're going to do all of these things, like anything, you need to be smart about it, and you need to take protections. And I'm guessing that the head of the CIA was wishing he had two-factor authentication on his account today because someone hacked his AOL account, and it was a teenager.
Shouldn't have been
Another security measure, I would guess.
It's always good to know that the CIA is using a platform that was developed, 30 years ago, Alan?
I think one of the things that Alan mentioned is, and Barbara is bringing this point home as well, and that is there are a lot of tools to remain anonymous. And what tends to happen is people drive right past those things. I know at eHarmony we've created an entire email system within our company so that you can exchange emails anonymously. We've created a phone system where you don't share your phone number. You're basically calling into a central number, and we're connecting the call. We've built all these things because we know that it's important, especially when you're dating. You want to meet new people. That's the whole point. But you don't want to give away your anonymity. But people drive right past it because he's so cute. I love him. Wow, well, you really hit it off. He's so great. I don't see any need for this. And so they just don't take advantage of the things that are out there. And depending on your situation, I think you just have to maybe give up on some of the pleasures of location-based services and protect yourself more.
That's a very important point, is that I was involved in the technology business for decades before I got into domestic violence, and I'm always amazed at the biggest way to create a breach in security is to simply call someone and ask them for something. And this morning, the breach with the CIA started with someone masquerading as a Verizon customer service rep. And so when Grant says driving right past something, we can put a lot of technology in place, as Tracy has said, that will keep track of us, and a lot of technology to make us disappear. But human behavior is still such that it takes over. And so part of what you need to consider as you're practicing social workers and growing in your field, and also as survivors, is to begin to recognize where you need to have those tools in place despite what your human behavior may be. Would you see that is the case, Barbara?
Well, I actually was just going to add the very inspirational and brave woman who was in the first panel that showed the video. It really, as a mother of a teenager, it really resonated with me because it came out of personal doubt. And, you know, I was saying to Grant earlier, his site is about vulnerability. To admit that you want to meet someone, that you're open to love, that you're open to meeting new people, puts you in the most vulnerable position imaginable. And then someone asks for your phone number, the most innocent thing in the world, and all of a sudden you're driving around barriers and onto the train tracks. You're driving around barriers and into a flood zone. And you think about all the situations where people put themselves in harm's way. This is no different. And I think it's the human part that you need to put aside, and it's not the self-doubt of you're not worthy. It's I am worthy, and I'm going to color within the lines until I'm sure that this is safe. Someone who doesn't meet you for 6 months, but you're sending money, does not want to be in a relationship. And, you know, pop culture is taking advantage of this. Shows like Catfish, where they show people who insist that they're in love. When there's the NFL draft, the guy who was playing college football, who was in love and going to marry someone he had never met before. And everybody else sits in judgment and says, how could that possibly be the case? How could this guy have fallen into that trap? Well, it comes down to your basic need to be loved and need to be validated. And so I find this such a frightening time. But you can empower yourself and make yourself stronger and teach your children and watch out for your friends and call bullshit on your girlfriends. Sorry, I apologize if this is a non-swearing event. But we have a social responsibility to speak out when something is fishy, it's fishy. And our instincts, human instincts, still go a long way despite technology telling us otherwise.
I'd like to add that technology puts an instant gratification aspect to this that is really hard to get around. So when you're holding a phone or a tablet in your hand, whether it's online dating or you've just won that thing on eBay, or you're getting this instant gratification. So the problem is that the criminals, the people who are targeting the stalkers, terrorists, they know that that psychology is occurring. So they are playing into this psychology. They know that once they've got you hooked, that instant gratification, that tech is right in front of your face. To the point of how many of you notice you go somewhere and people are walking around with a phone in front of them like this. They're not actually talking to you, they're looking at their device. Whether they're actually doing something important or not, they still have it up. It's like a shield. Unfortunately, it shields everybody because what they end up not seeing is what's right in front of them, both on the screen and in real life. So because of that sort of instant gratification, I've been criticized for saying this, but I think that our attention spans have gotten so short that we're pretty much like that of a gnat, and it just changes. And whereas before maybe you had 15 seconds to get someone's attention, I think now you've got 2 or 3 seconds. And technology just feeds into that. And so you have to kind of be aware of how you're using technology and how you're using these tools. They can all become addictive, number one. You can over-rely on them. You're using them at the wrong hours, so you're talking to the wrong people. It's just like going to a bar or going to a restaurant. If you go in the morning, it's one group. If you go in the evening, it's another group. But same thing with social media. Each social media platform actually has a different crew. If you want to get roughed up, don't go on Tumblr. Don't go on some of the techie websites where you will get roughed up just for showing your face. Facebook, Twitter have tried to become more aggressive about helping people who are in trouble. However, they are still failing, in my opinion, partly because they haven't cracked down on the sheer number of fake accounts. I actually got stalked by somebody who decided to follow me through social media initially. I made the mistake, which I've never done since, of live tweeting myself. I was at a charity event, and I said, I'm really pleased to be supporting this group at this charity today. And I walked out of the door, and the person was at the doorway waiting for me as I came out of the event. The reason was, it was a woman who basically wanted me to be her husband. I had no interest, didn't know her, obviously, and it just spiraled out of control to the point where I ended up having to threaten to get a restraining order. And I've stopped using Twitter in any way to use location, except for when I know there's 1,000 policemen around and I can say what I want to say. And I think, but that's an important lesson. I'm 6'2", I'm 190 pounds. I can defend myself. But I walked into a situation where I didn't know that person was there. If they could have had a gun or they could have done something dangerous, and I would never have known. I would have walked right out and had just been like, oh, I just stupidly tweeted my location. So I think it's an important lesson is when I go back to on location. There's zero reason to have the location on your devices on all the time. Yes, you can order food easier, or you can have a car come to you, or all these modern things. But unless you actually need to do that at that moment, turn off your location, because you're just leaking information. And it's not just to your cell phone provider or to your internet provider. It's to all the other companies around the world that are server companies that are replicating that data. So the data is not just sitting in one place. Everybody thinks, oh, my Facebook's account's just in Facebook. No, it's on the 20 or 30 servers they have around the world, some of whom are maintained by third-party companies. So you really start asking, well, where's my data going? Probably to some LLC that's owned by a company in the Bahamas. So you don't know who's selling it, who are they selling it to. Well, maybe they're selling it to the hacking cartels. Maybe that's how these people are getting in. So really think about when you're on social media, there's no reason to completely stay off, I don't think, barring unless you're in a really dangerous situation. But even that, then you can use the technology to your advantage to either call for help or to direct people to the person who's harassing you and get other people to sort of defend you, or any number of ways in which you can get resources. So I think that when you really look at, to me, it's like there's this interwoven fabric of social media, search, and technology. 5 years ago, that fabric it was just in pieces, but now it's like a blanket and it's all together. And so we all, whether you're in danger or not, we all have to be very highly conscious of our time, our location, and what you're saying and what kind of pictures you're posting. Because you could post a picture, not have a location on it, and post it just to your friends, but that picture could show everything about your house. It could show your kids, it could show your parents, it could show the pictures in the background, it could show a lot of information that you're not even thinking of. So it goes back to the human element of all of us have to be super careful what we post, when, and if you're someone who is in a dangerous situation and you're advising someone, well, maybe that's where you actually become very strategic and tactical. Like, okay, now I'm going to say I'm 500 miles away from where I really am.
And what is eHarmony doing in that context of anonymity and privacy in that, as Barbara said, most vulnerable state?
Well, I mentioned earlier that we've developed some different tools to remain anonymous. I think we spend a lot of time just trying to teach people to use them. We have an online magazine, and probably 30% of the content that we create for this magazine is just about being safe and being smart. I mentioned earlier that the number one rule is don't ever send anyone any money, no matter what they tell you. And I think the number two rule is get face-to-face with them as quickly as you can in a safe manner. Because a lot of the fraud, the catfishing, whatever that you guys have talked about is really just pen pals. And who wants a pen pal? Who's come to eHarmony for a pen pal? That seems crazy, but people fall into that. Well, he lives 500 miles away, and so we're going to really spend the next 6 months getting to know each other. No. You don't know anything about a man that's 500 miles away. And so most of that kind of problem is solved if you go and have coffee with someone. You have to do that in the right way, though, of course, right? You have to tell someone where you're going. You have to get there under your own power. You have to have set up a scenario where if you don't call your friend by a certain time, they know where you are and they come looking for you. And so you've got to be aware of that, just as you would no matter how you meet somebody. But I think from a romance standpoint, you're not going to know if you want to date someone until you see if you have chemistry. And even the guy from eHarmony will tell you we can't match you based on chemistry. You have to be sitting in front of someone and see what happens. So you've got to make that a priority. A lot of scammers are good at pushing that off. There's this reason and that reason. Nope, here's the deal. We've got to get together, and if we don't, then I don't want to communicate with you because I want a real relationship. So that's a big part of this. We have an entire division of our company called Trust and Safety. And Trust and Safety is there, of course, to try and screen out bad actors. We have a system by which when a profile comes in, the computer looks at that profile in a lot of different ways. The most basic way, which is of course something that sophisticated people can get around, is your IP address and the city and state, or the province and the city that you list. If you tell people that you're in San Diego, California, and your IP address says you're in Vietnam, we know you're a scammer. And so that profile is kicked out, and a person reviews it, and we can close it down. We have a lot of different ways to score a profile, a lot of different red flags that we're looking for. We share device information. When you use our site, there's a device ID that we get, and we share those with online dating companies around the world. So we're able to track people's devices who are acting inappropriately. So we have a very sophisticated team that works on this all the time, but I will tell you it is a cat and mouse game because, of course, as soon as you figure out how to thwart some particular tactic, they're smart people too, and they have a business to run, and they're figuring out a way to counterbalance that. So your best protection is the very basic things. Making sure that you don't send anyone any money, making sure that you see a person face to face, and making sure that you do that in the safest way possible.
With that, we'd like to open it up to questions. And Barry, can I hand you the microphone?
Maybe while this is happening, I actually did want to mention one other thing, which is while text to 911 is getting into place, the far second choice is for you to have someone that you can text one-to-one, because everybody has that ability. So if you were to text your sister, your best friend, someone, some word, or just 911 and a location, they know to take that seriously. They don't call you back in that scenario. They call for help. And I had a law enforcement person say to me, well, if somebody texts in and they don't tell us what kind of help to send, that's a problem. And my response was, send someone. A police officer, a firefighter, a paramedic, someone going to a location where someone is in need is better than no one showing up. And so if someone is in a potential situation of harm, my recommendation, and say this to your children, your mother, your girlfriends, your sons, if you're ever in a situation, text me with this word and 911 and someone will show up. They can geolocate someone by their phone. You can get a carrier. There's a lot of ways to do it, but that's a plan B, and we should live in plan B.
Hi. So I have a question specifically for Grant. Coming from a college student's perspective, Tinder is a very popular app with all of my friends, and really everyone, it seems, that I meet has a Tinder or has used it before. And I'm just curious if you have any insight on how safe that app is in comparison to sites like eHarmony. I know that a lot of people who I know who use Tinder would rather use the app because there are less barriers and less hoops to jump through to get the profile and to meet people, but then they're not realizing that that means that dangerous people also have less hoops to jump through as well.
How many people know what Tinder is? All the people in the middle. Basically, Tinder is superficial dating taken to its logical conclusion. It's photos and a headline. And you are served a photo and a headline, essentially from Facebook for a particular person. If you like them, you swipe one way. If you don't, you swipe the next way and you're served another person. So you won't be surprised to hear that the guy from eHarmony doesn't love Tinder, right? Because I understand that not everyone wants a serious relationship. That's, of course, natural. I was 22 once. I know what that's like. But people that date sometimes fall in love, and people that fall in love sometimes get married, and people that fall in love and get married sometimes have children. And if those people meet in that sort of superficial way, it's a little alarming to me. But of course, the point you make is exactly right. I mean, the whole structure for that site is we don't want to get in the way of you meeting as many people as you want to, however you want to. So Tinder is owned by Match.com. Match is a very reputable company that does a lot of the best practices, but Tinder doesn't have time for that. Tinder's about getting you hooked up as quick as possible. And I don't know if you've seen the billboards. It's caused a lawsuit. They're all over town. It says Tinder, chlamydia, Grindr, gonorrhea. Grindr is a gay hookup site. So Tinder's very angry about that billboard, of course, because they say there's no evidence that that happens. But the fact is, people hook up on Tinder, and that's what it's primarily for. That's not always bad, I suppose, but I would say from a safety standpoint, it's a concern.
Grinder kind of. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. This is the end of the second Domestic Violence Summit. Next year, same time, same bat channel. And we appreciate you all coming, and be safe. Thank you very much.